Today's fly will be a Clark's Lady Stone. It's the second of a series that Lee created. The original Clark Stone was back in the 1980s. And the only difference between a Clark Stone and a Clark's Lady Stone is a feather to emulate the egg sac of the female. I'll show you how to tie that. First of all, I'll select a hook. It's a 2x long. I'm using a Daiichi 1260 in a size 8. I usually tie these in size 10s, 8s, and 6s. The thread I'm using is a Danville 140 denier, and I'll explain why I'm using the 140. I normally tie with a 70 denier. I'll start right behind the eye of the hook, and I'll go back about halfway between the point of the hook and the barb. Next, I'll select some golden pheasant tippet. I'll select one feather, and you can see the black bar in here. That's what will emulate the egg sac of the natural. As I prepare these, I plan to fold this over, so I'll use only a portion of the feather and trim it. I'll fold these feathers and trim the butt ends so that I don't get any pushing from the end of it. It allows these to not to compress together, and aligns these tail ends a lot better. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch beyond the hook. Use a pinch wrap. And I'll wrap these down, trying to make them fairly smooth. I'm flattening my thread, going opposite. Every time I take a wrap, it turns, it makes a twist in the thread. I'm going to go back just a little bit with some soft wraps, and that should even things out so it doesn't flare. Next, for the body, I'm just going to use some tinsel. This is size 14. It's silver on one side and gold on the other, just mylar. I'll just use a soft wrap here. And then go up with touching turns. To a point about 1/3 behind. I want it to go to the 1/3 point. Generally, I use some Zap-A-Gap to create a little more sturdy fly. This is brushable, and just put a dab on. It doesn't need very much. If you apply it on the back of the body, as you turn the mylar going forward, it will push the super glue, the Zap-A-Gap, forward. I'm just going to use touching turns here. This is an interesting fly. Lee Clark is an artist, and so his mind works much different than mine. So what he's done is to combine colors in order to make the fly look like nature really created it. I'll use 3 turns, and that will secure it. Next I'll use some of his poly yarn. So this is a variegated. It's a combination of yellow and gold, and it emulates the natural really well, or her golden stone. And you can use a comb. If I can find my comb, here it is. So those fibers will splay out more. And I'll trim these. Over here, my garbage cans on the side. And I'm going to tie these in. I'll tie one end first, just a soft wrap, and you'll notice that I'll pull on the ends just to create where I want those to end. I'm going to tie it just on the side closest to you, tie it down with some wraps. Trim the excess. Come back a little bit, and then with the other end of it, I'm trying to create additional bulk. And I will start back a little bit, and that will help create my taper for the front of the body. Now you can pull these, and I want them to be right where I tied off the mylar. And I'll cut these just a little bit shorter than what the egg sac would be, the black marks. And I'm going to add just a tiny bit more bulk here. I'm just going to use one more piece. There's 2 soft wraps, and I'll pull this, and you notice it's shorter than the rest, so I'm just continuing to create a taper for my fly for the thorax area. And you notice that it's covering, the thread is now covering a lot faster, and that's why I use the 140 denier thread rather than the 70 denier. It's twice as thick, or twice as wide, and I want that to be nice and thick, covering it. That will be our body. And I'm going to use some stimulator deer hair. I'll get out my hair stacker. Just going to use my scissor points and pull up some hair and trim it off camera here. Hold it by the tips, and I'll pull out all of the short hair and the guard hair. You can see the fuzz. Stick it in my hair stacker with tips first. Turn it horizontal, and I'll pull it out the same direction that I want to have the wing. I'm measuring it so it's going to be a little bit longer than what the body would be with the egg sac. And right where my thumb is, I'm going to trim it. And this is how I'll attach it. I'll explain why. I'll show you a different trick, but I take 2 soft wraps and pull, and a couple through there. and that sets your wing. You can just press down a little bit. We can trim these. And you notice that the wing is now sitting directly on top, it's tied directly on top. And I'll wrap some of these down now. I'll go all the way down to the eye of the hook, creating my taper, flatten my thread. I'll tie these in a size 4 for a salmon fly, and you can use thread like this or perhaps a little bit of dubbing. That would create a little bit thicker thorax area. Trim a couple of these longer hair, the hair butts. And for my hackle, I have a brown or a ginger saddle hackle. Strip off some of the fibers here along the side, and I'll tie this in, one on top, one behind, and then that secures it. I'll go forward with touching turns, trying to continue that adding bulk and that taper. Actually, I'll back off a little bit because I want to leave a little bit of room for the head. Remember my Zappa gap. I'll pull this out, and for durability, just add a little bit on top. And I'll start winding forward. And Lee ties this with sparse hackle. You can I wrap them usually this way, but I'll also place additional wraps there for higher floatability. Lee believes that having a few wraps in there makes the fly fish better because it will sit lower in the surface film. And that's what the naturals do. I'll tie this off with a 5-turn whip finish. And there's your completed Clark's Lady Stone. The last thing he does will trim out a V in the bottom, and it will sit flatter. So let me show you a different method how I used to tie them. And it caused me some problems. So hopefully showing you this, you'll be able to compare and contrast, and it might make your flies turn out a little bit better. I'll start behind the eye of the hook again. I'll tie this a little bit faster since you've already seen me creating the tail and the body. Again, I'm going to go back to a point halfway between the barb and the hook eye. And here's the section of feather that I used. So let's see if I have enough. It's not quite enough, so I'm going to select another feather. We'll cut out the middle point again. I'll fold this over so the bright side is showing, and see how these fibers are all curved. And so when I trim that, the fibers are off of the stem and allows them to be straighter as my tail. So I'll hold that, use a pinch wrap, and just light wraps to begin with so I don't flare it too much. And since I'm using my 140 denier, as it creates that twist, I flatten my thread to keep a smooth body. And it's really important for a smooth body as you're wrapping with your mylar. I'll go all the way to the head, because remember, I want to build up my thorax area. I'll return to the tail. I'm just using touching turns. I'll go take a couple of extra wraps. And on this curved hook, you don't want to go down too far because then the tail will extend downward. And I don't want that. I'm going to use a soft wrap. I have the silver side out, the gold side towards the body, and notice that the mylar is up here. Keeping a nice smooth wrap going forward with the combination of the mylar. I don't have any bumps then as I would wrap my mylar forward. Go all the way to the eye again and come back to the 1/3 point. Use my Zappa gap. I like this brushable. I can control the amount of cement that is on my body. As I take my first wrap, then the gold edge, the gold side shows then. And I'm just using touching turns. Go to the 1/3 point and I wrap it off, tie it off on the bottom. Use 3 tight wraps. I'll pull my poly yarn out. One of the problems I had early on was that I would create too much of a bump right in here. So as I tied in my poly, I would tie it all right at the eye, and it would create a huge bump there, and then when I wanted to tie it off, I had problems with the hackle falling off. So I trim these fibers. So I'll go back a little bit, and I'm creating this taper where I tie on the poly yarn. I'm just using touching turns, and I'll trim these. I don't want to pull them tight because then they'll bounce back and it'll be too short. So I just leave them loose. And we could use that. The last time I added one more piece, but I'll just use it like this time. I'll select some more deer hair. And this is how I used to tie them. I'm taking all the fuzz out over by my garbage can, trying to control some of the deer hair. It can get pretty messy at times. Put the tips in. when Lee ties them, he doesn't like to use the hair stacker. He likes a little bit more taper on it. This time, the last time what I did was to cut it off, and I'll show you why I do that. This time I will not. So here's what I used to do. I take a couple of wraps, and then it flares. I'll wrap through it a little bit, which is fine. But now I've got all of this deer hair to deal with. So I used to trim this. And as you can see, it's more time consuming, and for me, it's just more of a mess. Now I've got to go take a lot more thread wraps to try to get that orange body, orange thorax that I went up here. And this will certainly work. And if you like this method, go for it. But as I've said earlier, I have found the other one works better for me. This will actually create a little bit thicker of a head. In my last couple wraps up here, I'm going to make them loose. You can see I'm still trimming the butt ends a little bit. I'm going to create this loose wraps so that my deer hair doesn't flare. And I've got my hackle again. I'll tie this in. And you notice that I've got some bare stem so that as I make that first turn, I don't capture any barbules. I go behind, and that kind of locks it in. Take some more wraps and firmly go forward. And this time I'll make a few more wraps so you can see what a thicker hackled fly will look like. And then as you're tying them, you can decide which one you like better. So my first wrap, the hackle extending out. On the counter, there's 7 wraps, I think. 8. Make one more. I'll hold the hackle up, bring the thread forward, or the upright, move the hackle forward, and that opens the barbules, so I end up putting a thread wrap just around the stem of the hook, and I don't capture near as many barbules as I tie off my feather. I'll trim, flatten my thread. I'm going to make my head now and go backwards. So I'm starting my whip finish right where the hackle is. As I use my 5-turn whip finish, I'll go forward, and that's a proper way to do a whip finish. Tighten it, and just use sharp scissors to trim that. And there's the other fly. So you can see that the head, the one I just tied, is about twice as thick with hackle, but whichever style you like. And there's your Clark's Lady Stone.